Welcome to Franchise Focus. I'm Laura Blackmore, your host, and a franchise consultant with over a decade experience in franchising. Franchising isn't one size fits all, and this podcast helps focus on what truly matters. Each week, we pull back the curtain with top industry experts, whether you're exploring your first franchise or expanding your portfolio. Let's dive in. Welcome to Franchise Focus. Today, I'm joined with Dylan Siwinski, Director of Franchise Development at Franchise Fastlane. Dylan brings a wealth of experience in sales, operation, and franchise development, having worked across various industries. Currently, he plays a pivotal role in expanding brands like ZoomDrain, a unique franchise in the home service sector. ZoomDrain specializes in drain and sewer service that complements rather than competes with traditional plumbers. Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Laura. I appreciate the introduction. Just happy to be chatting with you.
This would be great. If you give us a little bit, you've got a great background, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into what ZoomDrain does and its services.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And thank you for saying I have a great background. You know, I started in the franchising space, I like to say, when I was like 17 years old. And so I've been around the space for a long time. Now, granted, definitely on a different side of it. I started as a manager for a gentleman that owned a couple stores in Spokane, Washington, and he lived in Des Moines. And so I've been in the space for a while. Took about a 6-year break and was working in automotive startups for a good chunk of time, kind of throughout the COVID era, and everybody has a different start and stop date for that. But post-COVID, we exited those businesses and had a blast with it. So I've got experience from that side, but really kind of just missed the franchising space. So I found a great home with Fastlane and ZoomDrain and have enjoyed it ever since.
Awesome. So can you bring us up to telling us a little bit more about what ZoomDrain does and how the brand was built?
Yeah, and a really great story. Jim Crinity is the founder and CEO of ZoomDrain, and he started it back in 1995, which very few brands, I think, that are in the space can say that they've been doing it for, 30 years as of this year. I always joke around that the company of ZoomDrain has a year on me in its lifespan, right? So it's pretty wild to be representing a company with that much time in the space. But Jim's got an Air Force background, and his dad was a plumber. His brothers were in the plumbing space. And frankly, he just really saw a need for someone to kind of fill the gap in cleaning and clearing in particular. Really, drain work, right, is the distinction there. And so I think Jim says it the best, where he's been doing it for 30 years. He's never held a plumbing license because it's typically not required for what we do. And we really fill that niche that plumbers don't want to do, which is plumbers like fresh water coming in, right? They like new construction and some of the things they go out and get that master plumber's degree for. Whereas us, we're everything flowing out, right? The stuff that plumbers don't want to deal with, right? The stuff that homeowners certainly don't want to deal with is the stuff flowing away from their house. And so there's quite a few verticals that live inside of it. But really what Jim, I think, brought to the table when he founded it was the structure. He's a really, really intelligent person and built the structure similar to that Air Force mindset, right? Of like, hey, if you want to earn this, go do this, right? Whether it's as a franchisee or kind of the base level drain tech or apprentice, they see that upward path in that book of standard operating procedures. And so the structure is just phenomenal.
So you're talking about that upward path. Tell us a little bit about that employee base and where you find them and how you bring them up that path.
Yeah. So in the apprentice role, right, which is really where when you get the ball rolling, you're typically hiring that same person over and over again, right? Is that person in the apprentice role, which is a huge benefit for the franchisee. But when you talk about apprentices, you're not looking for somebody with any experience at all. Likely they've had 1 or 2 jobs as they're kind of, working through their career. They're typically younger people, and you get to onboard them and say like, hey, this is the path to being a drain tech, right? And you can walk them through, here's all the things you need to do to get our internal certification to go eventually be on your own truck and make X amount of dollars an hour with a bonus structure. And they see that consistent upward mobility all the way to field manager. It's something that we help our franchisees do right when they launch, is help them build a compensation structure that makes sense for their market. Because when it comes to cleaning and clearing, labor is your number one cog. There's not a ton of materials cost. And so you really can build your pricing structure off of your compensation structure. And that promotes the ability for your employees to see a career path. And they're going to hear that a ton from the folks in Philadelphia, the flagship location. The average tenure there is like 4.5 years, which is really impressive for the space. But then when you talk about the initial hire and finding your initial hire, you do want someone with a little bit of know-how, right? Somebody that's going to be in your corner. We haven't had a ton of challenges finding people. I will tell you, it's a big space. There's a lot of people looking to make a jump. There's definitely a few pretty established companies out there that do similar to what ZoomDrain does. I wouldn't call it the same, but a lot of those folks like ZoomDrain's employment structure a little bit better because of that upward mobility I was talking about. So you onboard that first drain tech and they're going, okay, if we grow this, I can go be a field manager, right? Which is a big deal to kind of oversee all of those trucks out on the road. And so it hasn't been super challenging finding folks. And I will tell you the avenues are not too dissimilar from hiring for any other kind of position. Indeed.com, you're going to put out job ads and you're going to put them through our interview process and training process the same way. Retention is always a big fear in the trades because people are going, okay, I've never employed tradespeople, etc. If you follow our blueprint, it's not going to be a challenge for you at the end of the day.
So when somebody does a job, I'm kind of jumping around, but it got me thinking, are you typically one person on one truck that one person can do the job, or how does that usually work?
Yeah, no, normally one drain tech can handle the jobs. I will say on a couple of the trucks that you have on the road, you're going to have an apprentice along board with them. And part of that is that employment pipeline I was talking about, so they can go get trained and be a part of it. But most jobs you can do solo. You are going to get a little bit more efficiency out of two people on a truck, because if you have two people doing the same job, obviously it's going to take a little bit less time while that apprentice is getting trained, simultaneously to it.
So when, we've got interested people, or who, most people are not thinking about ZoomDrain when they're thinking about getting into franchising. And it is a fun one to present sometimes as an out there one. But what's the aha moment do you see for people considering it, that like why they're looking at ZoomDrain? What are the features that really resound with them?
Yeah, I would say, number one, I have yet to have anybody come to the table and say, gosh, I'm just really passionate about drains. I lived my whole life looking to go work on drains, right? That's not the typical experience. But I think number one reason people get excited and interested in ZoomDrain is it's recession resistant, right? Very recession resistant. I'm always really tempted to say recession proof because it's such a large industry. People always got to use the toilet. They always got to use the shower. They want to do the laundry, and all of those things require a drain that's functioning, right? And so that it's not going away. And I think people really like that. But another big aha moment for people, I think, as they get further along in process is that it's what I like to call a legacy business. When you get this business to a certain size and it's self-reliant, it's something you don't have to touch very often if you get a good group of people, right? And they're going, okay, this is what it could look like in 5 years. And if they're looking at that long term, they start to realize that you're in a space that's not going away. You get those sticky B2B accounts, and they realize that eventually it's just going to be printing money for them, which is a very fun outlook to have on the long term of the business, right? I talk about this a little bit on, a basis with them, but I think there's two kinds of franchises out there as a whole. And I like to call them rip and flips, right? Where it's something you can build up really big over 3 years and you can kind of turn it over. And they typically are fads, right? In a lot of those, whereas ZoomDrain's a little bit different, right? It's not something I would recommend doing for 3 years and then turning over, because you could build it so much bigger over a slightly longer period of time. And at that point, you wouldn't even want to sell it, right? Because it's going to be so established that, why would you?
So when a franchisee starts, what is their typical, training like before, and what's their process? What are they typically doing in the business?
I'll tell you, we've got basically two different models when it comes to ownership style. You've got owner operator, which a lot of people imagine owner operator is what we call owner technician, right? But owner operator, you're really heavily focused on business development, because something that everyone, when you imagine ZoomDrain, everyone kind of imagines like somebody's got an overflowing toilet. I'm going to go fix that problem for them in their home. And that's a good chunk of what we do, but that's the residential side of this. The other really big, important part of growing this business is B2B, because all of those businesses that you think about, your multifamily dwelling units, your restaurants, your large industrial facilities, all of those have toilets that need to flush as well. And so being their go-to guy is going to be the biggest deal. So heavily focused on business development as the owner, focused on leadership and of course, building a good team underneath you. But those are really your primary directives in owner operators, that you're going out and you're kind of doing the outside sales or business development to bring on those accounts. As owner technician, that's when you're on the truck every day, right? And I will tell you, it takes a certain kind of person to want to go do it that way, but it's also the fastest route to profitability, I think, possible in franchising. It's typically younger guys and gals that are on that truck, but you can start paying yourself on the first job that you go out and do, right? Which is a little bit different. I would say it's a slower path to scale, right? I always joke around that. Doesn't matter the business, doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're working the front desk, the hardest hire is replacing yourself, right? So sometimes it's hard to yank those people off the truck because they're paying themselves so well. It's like, hey, you're so close, you get the business, you're ready to scale it. But those are really the two ways to run it, right? And owner technician is definitely challenging. It's something where you're wearing all the hats early on, right? And sometimes you're your only employee, but it's also really cool to watch people scale through that. And we've got some really neat success stories from that side.
So when a franchisee starts, what is the marketing approach? I mean, how does the residential come to them? How do they network and get those referrals, and how does that scale over time?
Yeah. And I did skip, I apologize. I skipped over the last part of one of your questions too around training.
Yes.
And I definitely, I can almost kind of tackle two of those hand in hand because there's going to be a lot of training that goes into the business development side in particular, right? Not all of our folks are coming from a sales background of any kind, right? We've got all kinds in this model. And so there's a pretty strong focus on teaching people how to pursue those accounts, right? We're going to provide lists of entities to you. We also have things like national portals where you can go and you can service the Walgreens and the Walmarts and some of those bigger places that they're not going to be your top earners, right? But it's a really great way to go get revenue right out of the gates and kind of start attacking those things and forming relationships. But we're also going to help by providing lists of plumbers and folks to reach out to because like you were saying at the beginning, like a big distinction for us is that we work for plumbers and with plumbers. And so teaching you how to kind of talk the lingo sometimes can go a long way too, right? Because these are blue collar folks. And so a lot of training focused around business development early on. And then when it comes to the drain work, I will tell you, we have some pretty sweet training. The Philadelphia location is where they host a Spartan Tool Boot Camp, where you're basically getting hands-on with all the equipment. And I'll tell you, whether you're on the truck or off the truck as the owner, we want you to go do it so you understand, like, this is what the tools do, right? And you understand what goes on the truck and what's a part of everything. And so there's a boot camp involved where you get hands-on with training. And a typical apprentice, if you get them on the truck for 60 to 90 days, they're going to be able to handle 90% of the jobs you go out and do in cleaning and clearing because the handbooks are really buttoned up. There's a page for every kind of job in that handbook. BD is part of that, right? BD is a huge part of it, especially on the B2B side. I will tell you, B2C, I think everyone in home service knows that digital's in a different place than it was, 5 years ago, 6 years ago during the COVID era. And so digital is a huge part of B2C, right? We still want to be competitive in that space and go and acquire those people because those are emergency services, right? They're typing like, hey, my toilet's overflowing. They're typing into Google and going, okay, who has availability, right? So digital certainly a big part of B2C. But the plumbing referrals and going after them on the business development side is also really big for B2C because sometimes those plumbers get calls to the residential side that they don't want to do or they don't have the equipment to handle. So a lot of people that have had drain issues before, they've had that situation where one person shows up to their house, they kind of diagnose, and they go, well, I've got a guy that's got X, Y, and Z piece of equipment to go do it. A lot of times it's not even the same company, right? And that's a big portion of our business as well as referrals from plumbers. And so you've got the kind of tandem business development with digital marketing. And then, of course, you've got a huge list of assets in our Canva pages and things along those lines to go print out door hangers and mailers and all of those fun things. But really, during the onboarding process, we're going to get a good feel for where we get traction, whether it's pay-per-click or Google. Google's huge, right? But really, we're going to push out an initial marketing campaign through Service Titan, which is this really great CRM that we utilize to figure out where are we getting the most interaction before we actually open your doors in your market. So that way, hopefully, we have a pretty decisive plan of like, this is where you should be putting your dollars.
Interesting. Call comes in, emergency call, let's say they did find you digitally. How is that handled? Is that being routed directly to the franchisee? Is there a call center? How's that?
It's typically being routed directly to the franchisee. Our experience with call centers has been that if you have stuff flowing into your house, you really don't want to get redirected somewhere. It's on the other side saying, hey, we're this far out. And so that's one of your starting positions as a service coordinator. Really, job is managing dispatch, answering the phone, and making sure customers are feeling taken care of.
Excellent. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. How many franchisees do you guys have now at this point?
We have, my gosh, I should know this off the top of my head. We have, I believe we have about 56 franchisees in the system as
Fantastic.
It sits.
When you think across the board of the top producers, what do you think those success factors? What are they doing besides hopefully following the system, but that is making them successful?
Well, and I would say following the system is a big part of it, right? I mean, there's just a huge pool of resources that ZoomDrain provides with the experience that Jim Kennedy has. So definitely following the system. And I'll tell you, like when I pull that top performing list of franchisees with ZoomDrain, they all have such different backgrounds, which is really funny. We've got some guys that maybe were in a little bit more of a blue collar space. Like I think of like Jason Allen. He's got an HVAC background, which is not necessarily in plumbing, but it's similar. He's been in the space. So I think for him, his superpower was maybe just speaking the language of, like I said, more blue collar work. I think that was great for him. Rachel Dugan in Indianapolis, she's doing fantastic. And if somebody wants to hear Rachel's story on the Fastlane page, we actually have a full interview with her and Carrie Gale that is great, and they can hear it. But she, just not from a blue collar space, really kind of corporate background. And, you go into her shop and she's doing fantastic. And I think like if I had to draw a parallel between those two folks that are in that top performing bracket still early on in operation, it's really that they took a bunch of action on business development in particular, right? Not only did they take the resources and utilize them effectively to go, this is the right way to do it, but they also really just sat down and they did the work on BD, right? They were sending pizzas to plumbers, right? They were in the spaces and networking. Like there's plumbing conferences that happen every year that you can go out to and you can start forming those relationships. And so following the playbook, but also just taking a ton of action to kind of form those steps. Same thing with, I would say, Robert Kohler in Columbus. He was able to make a pretty quick exit from doing the business development. I believe he did it for about 7 months and then pretty quickly hired a kind of a sales rep to do the BD for him. But he also really, really quickly went out and formed all of those relationships, right? To get some of those sticky accounts and get cash flow positive really fast. And so I think what they have in common is just, kind of spinning their wheels for a couple months and getting some traction is really all it takes.
When you look at a typical market, maybe we could talk about the kind of the average overall investment, and then what is the plan for growth? I mean, do you start with one truck and then add, or how does that usually work?
We've seen a couple people start with 2 trucks. I will tell you the majority of people start with one and kind of transition into that second, third, fourth, fifth truck. There's some people we're seeing get to that third, almost fourth truck inside their first year. I would say that's pretty aggressive reinvestment, right? And that's not necessarily the blueprint. Those are folks that really see the value in building the business to a certain size where they can grow a little bit more slower and a little more methodically down the road, right? And some of that relates to capital position. But the way that people are able to accomplish that, frankly, is through leasing the trucks. And it's a really cool program. You can do that in a number of different ways. That Bancor is not really a papered partner of ours, but they do a lot of work with us. And the nice part about leasing those trucks is it's an asset heavy business, right? When you talk about the equipment required to go do it, that cabin frame is going to wear out much quicker than the custom aluminum box and all of the tools that are on that truck. And so by the end of a 5-year lease on that truck, you typically can get a brand new truck on a new lease. You're actually lowering the amount that you're going out and leasing, and that box and all of that equipment you can just put on a brand new truck. And you're pretty substantially lowering your debt servicing. And so instead of just, paying X amount of dollars in cash, you can start to lease those vehicles as the debt servicing that you're adding per the months allows. And now you're actually scaling up that business pretty aggressively. And so that's the way that people have been able to accomplish that and grow pretty quick.
Very interesting. Wow. So, and does it take a while to have those built out? Or let's say someone goes through the franchise process, they love it, they sign with you. What's kind of the timeline to open?
Timeline to open is probably 4 to 5 months on the high end. I've seen people launch before that. Some of it's finding real estate and the few things that you need to do to be able to launch, but mostly training, right? We want people to know what they're doing, especially on the BD side, right? You got to, like you said, talk the talk, walk the walk. So a lot of it's training, spending time out in your location, getting comfortable with digital marketing. So a lot goes into the onboarding process. When it comes to getting another truck, those trucks are somewhere between 20 and 45 days out. It's going to happen really quick as far as us getting you one, sometimes quicker than that. We've got really great distributor relationships, with the folks that it's at a Suzuki cabin frame or a Chevy cabin frame that goes under the truck. Custom built aluminum box comes from Bergey's. They do an excellent job putting that together for us. It's kind of our little trade secret is how that box is laid out. And then Spartan Tool does all of our equipment. And so really strong national relationships with those companies, and we can put together a truck very fast for somebody. The total initial investment for a single territory is right around $490,000, right? And what I will tell you is, and this, being an expert at what you do, right? Some item 7s are more detailed than others. Our item 7 is pretty substantial in terms of line items, right? Like we've got your first 3 months of payroll and general liability and workers' compensation in there. We've got your first technically 7 months of marketing before you launch, right? It's a beefy item 7 because we want people to go in and have the capital they need to make the moves that they need to.
That's
but
good.
The largest part of that investment is the truck. And if you're evaluating SBA in particular, you normally are going to have to put that truck on the SBA because they want to see a physical asset. But that truck before tax, title, and licensing is about $165,000. Right? And trust me, it's not because we're not getting some steep deals on that equipment. It's because the equipment's expensive, right? And that's part of the reason plumbers don't want to do it. That HydroJet by itself is a $30,000 to $50,000 piece of equipment that I won't necessarily give out our special pricing on some of that stuff, but we do.
What kind of space is typically important to have?
Small flex space, right? Not necessarily a customer facing location. You want, roughly 1,000 square foot office space. You could maybe go a little bit smaller, and then you want it attached to a shop. You don't need to store the vehicles inside. You just want a small shop that you can work on that vehicle, because maintaining the equipment's important, right? That's the lifeblood of your business. And a lot of it, it's not rocket science to maintain, right? There's water going through a tube, and you got to make sure the tube's cleaned out and your water compressor's doing fine. But you want a small tool crib area in that shop that you can work on those vehicles and stock them out, kit them out, all that fun stuff.
Okay. So we talked about, you don't need prior experience in the home services. What I have seen in home services, it does, and you talked a little bit about some of those successful owners, the people that understand the foundation has to be built, build that foundation, build that strong team, but can work with all types of employees, not, so whether it's in the office employees and also the, for lack of a better word, the technicians, the blue collar, but employees that are getting out there and getting the stuff done. And a lot of those can still be sales as well, but people that can relate to all those, I would imagine that's important. But when you think about you've launched, you've got your business going, a typical day of an owner, I mean, how much time are they spending on the business development side and then more office stuff? What's the,
when you very first launch, I would say that you're where you're needed more than anything else, right? And if you're not needed on the operation side, if there's no fires to put out, which the funny thing is as you grow, typically there's more fires to put out, right? Than when you first start, because you've typically got a small lean crew and they typically are pretty accountable. But when you start, the majority of it's going to be focused on business development, right? And then building the team, right? Like I said, the folks that do really well, it's because they're taking a lot of action. They're taking a lot of action on business development, and they're being in the spaces that they should be in. And the split, I would say, in an ideal world, it's 50-50, but I think in that early stage, the folks that launch really quick, they're probably spending 60% of their time on business development and 40% on maintaining the business. There's some of our owners that, they see their technicians in person maybe 2-3 times a week, because those technicians are out on the road all day, right? And so kind of maintaining a good meeting cadence and keeping those guys and gals motivated is important. But you're going to have a lot of time throughout the day, touch and go communication, to be able to tackle business development.
When you talked about some of those owners that scaled really quickly and added additional trucks, do they own more than one territory? Can one territory support multiple trucks, or how does that typically work?
Absolutely. And that's a great question, because I always try to get people to do truck math when they go make their projections, is what I call it, right? Because that truck should be producing a certain amount of revenue for you. And that really kind of helps determine the jumping off point to getting that next truck. But one territory can typically support about 4 to 5 cleaning and clearing trucks, because we've got pretty large territories, right? It's 300,000 in population, which typically that's getting you 110,000 households, right? That's a lot of households to go service.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say most franchisees are starting somewhere between 2 and 3 territories. And the reason for that is one centralized location can pretty effectively service 2 to 3 territories. And now long-term, you're looking at a 15 truck business, right? And that's not including verticals like septic and grease trap pumping, or if you do want to go get that plumber's license and still not step on the toes of plumbers, you can do pipe repair replacement, relining, pipe bursting. All of those things are still in our niche. And that's not even including those 15 cleaning and clearing trucks you could go have on the road.
Pretty cool. And so the longest franchisee has been there how long?
Oh gosh, since 2015. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got some brand new folks, and we've got some tenured folks, right?
So so plenty of people to talk to at all different stages, which is nice for owners or potential investors to look at. I like it when they have the various stages. No, that's great. Anything more on the technology side of things or industry trends that'll be changing this industry at all? Or?
Not a whole lot of change in the industry. I think that there's always new applications when it comes to fixing a drain. But I'll tell you, they've been the same for a good chunk of time. Jim Crinity has got such a long history in the space that he's able to walk somebody through like the different stages of how camera technology has developed, right? And the original camera technology, I believe, was made for looking at shipwrecks underwater, and that later transferred into the technology that we see today to run a camera down the pipe. So there's always new technology in the space,
right? It just makes it.
But yeah, it makes it really easy to be able to scope down but it's all the same pipe, right? It's all the same structure. It all runs out to municipal, and so there's not going to be a ton of changes. On the back end, our technology suite is very impressive. Like Service Titan is by and large the best CRM that I've seen used. And CRM is almost doing it a disservice to call it a CRM, because you're not only you're tracking your technicians, but you're managing all your marketing, you're managing numbers performance through that software. And we've got really strong relationships with Service Titan, and Ellen Rohr plays a big role with Service Titan as well, who was kind of co-founder of the franchise. A lot of people know Ellen. She's just a fantastic human being, but she's pretty heavily involved with Service Titan as well. And really strong relationship there, fantastic technology suite. And our hub, we're actually really close to integrating in full AI components into our hub. So that way our franchisees, if they have a question, they can just type in a question prompt.
Right.
It'll bring them straight to a resource, which is going to be very fun.
It's going to be incredible. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just amazing what some of that technology can do. So any other words of wisdom or final advice for aspiring entrepreneurs and, looking to get into the home service space, and maybe why to consider ZoomDrain?
Yeah, well, gosh. And I'll tell you what, if all of those things that we've talked about so far don't sound like they're up your alley, right? As far as doing business development, building a great team, it's probably not for you. That would be my advice. Like, we want people that want to do those things, right? If building a good team lights you up and kind of running for mayor of Draintown lights you up, that's great. But for folks that are working with someone like yourself, I would say, one, lean on your consultant, lean on someone like Laura that can help you through the process and has some experience in the space and can talk you through kind of the doubts and all of the fears that you're going to have throughout it. But if you're a little uncomfortable, I would just say that you're in the right place, and that you're really close to making the leap into something pretty fun.
This has been great, Dylan. I really appreciate it. Interesting. I love this business model. It's so interesting, and it's so neat how you can build something big. It is a sizable investment, but that assets are going to generate revenue for a long time. So it's just doing the math, as you said, working that through it if you can. But yeah, no, I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll circle back in a year or so, and we'll hear how big ZoomDrain is again.
Yeah, it's to the moon is what I imagine over the next couple of years. So it'll be very fun.
All right, great. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks so much.
That's a wrap for this episode of Franchise Focus. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. If you're thinking about franchise ownership or want to learn more about the brands we discuss, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit my website at blackmorefranchiseconsulting.com, or just leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Franchise Focus.